conspiracy towards that everyone hates.
Well,
Maybe
people
not that
don't know
everyone
that they
hates.
hate it, but students learn about negligence per se, and as they're learning about it, they read the case of Gorris versus Scott.
Per se, that's like Latin.
It's like Latin.
Ah! That hurts me.
And
what does that mean?
Negligence per se is the doctrine by which, if a defendant violated a statute, it makes the plaintiff's life a lot easier. Because instead of the plaintiff having to prove that the defendant did something unreasonable, instead we can substitute a violation of a statute for breach of a duty, which ends up being a much shorter analysis.
So, wait, there was a lot of words. So, in other words, instead of having to go duty, breach, and then causation damages, if you have a statute, you could just be like, oh, violated the statute, pay me.
Causation damages.
Causation damages, right.
But,
okay.
So it's easier because when you're proving duty, there's like a lot of different ways that you could potentially prove duty, and there's, a lot of unrest about which you use. Do you use learned hand? Do you use reasonable person? Like, how do you do it?
And I imagine that because there's a lot of ways that you could use duty, there's a lot of ways that you could say that you didn't have a duty.
Exactly.
So it's hard, it's easy to defend, so it's hard.
Right.
Okay.
So when someone breaks a law, it makes it a lot easier to show that they did something they weren't supposed to do, and that's negligence per se. And that's why we want to use the violation of a statute, because it makes life easier for the plaintiff. But there are rules about when a plaintiff is allowed to do that. You can't just willy-nilly just find a statute, you can't do that.
I would imagine that the statute would have to apply.
Right, the statute has to apply
to the situation.
And what that means is that the plaintiff has to be in the class of people to be protected by that statute, and the kind of damage that was done has to be why the statute was written in the first place.
So in other words, there was a problem,
and we had this statute to fix that problem, and you violated the statute, and now you got the problem.
Okay,
right?
all right.
Okay.
This makes me think of sheep.
Yeah, it makes me think of sheep too, right? So people will read the case of Gorris versus Scott, which is this like really old case.
Gorris.
Gorris had some sheep.
He had some sheep.
I don't know who was who actually.
We don't. Yeah, somebody was the plaintiff and somebody was the defendant, and someone was shipping sheep by ship.
Right, they were shipping the sheep by ship.
And there was a statute that said how you were supposed to ship your sheep.
And it said when you ship sheep,
you have to put on special sheep shoes, which would have kept the sheep still on the ship.
And this particular guy, he didn't use his sheep shoes.
No.
He was bereft of sheep shoes.
He was bereft, and what happened was the sheep were running willy-nilly all over the ship.
And you know what happened?
They went overboard.
They went overboard. They were drowning sheep.
So, did he get his sheep shipment?
The sheep shipment never got there.
The sheep shipment.
Somebody shooed
the sheep shipper.
Yeah.
Right.
And said, you violated the statute. We had the statute that said you had to keep the sheep on the ship and the sheep shoes. You failed to follow the sheep and the sheep shoes on the ship statute.
Right. Causing the sheep to go overboard and now
pay me damages.
Right.
There was a little problem though. Because in that case, the reason why those statute writers wrote that sheep shoe statute had nothing to do with sheep going overboard.
It wasn't dealing with the problem with keeping sheep still on the ship.
No, they wrote the statute for the purpose of making sure that disease doesn't spread on the ship. And apparently there were some sheep sicknesses.
Sheep were getting sick, and having shoes was going to stop the sheep sickness.
Apparently.
And the incidental benefit of sheep shoes was to keep them still on the ship.
Right.
But that wasn't the entire purpose of the sheep shipping statute.
Right.
So because
even though the guy violated the sheep shipping statute, the statute wasn't written to help this particular problem. So it doesn't mean that the defendant didn't do anything wrong, and it doesn't mean that the plaintiff loses his case. It just means that the plaintiff is not allowed to use negligence per se as a shortcut to get to causation of damages.
So this is Gorris versus what?
Gorris versus Scott.
And it's the negligence per